There's a moment in almost every financial journey that feels strangely quiet, almost easy to miss. One day, you're checking your account and wondering why all this effort still feels so slow. The numbers barely move. The progress feels invisible. And then, at some point, something shifts. Not overnight, not with fireworks, but suddenly your money starts doing more than just sitting there. It begins to make money on its own. That moment isn't luck. And it definitely isn't magic. It's math, patience, and time finally lining up. Most people never reach it. Not because they're lazy or irresponsible, but because they assume the slow start means something is wrong. They quit right before the system starts working in their favor. This video isn't about getting rich fast. It's about understanding when and why wealth finally begins to accelerate, and why so many people walk away just a few steps too early. If you've ever felt like you're behind financially, you're not alone. In fact, that feeling is almost built into the process. We live in a culture that rewards speed and visibility. Promotions are public. Purchases are visible. Success looks loud. Meanwhile, real wealth grows quietly, often in ways you can't see for years. That disconnect messes with your head. You start comparing your slow, boring progress to someone else's highlight reel and assume you're doing something wrong. But here's the truth most people never hear. Feeling behind is often a sign that you're actually doing the right thing. In the early stages of wealth building, effort and results are completely out of sync. You're saving, investing, saying no to small comforts, and yet your net worth barely moves. That doesn't mean the strategy is broken. It means you're still in the hardest phase. This is where patience gets tested and where most people quietly give up, not because the math failed them, but because their expectations did. The biggest lie most of us believe about money is that it grows in a straight, predictable line. Save a little more, get a little richer. Miss a month, fall a little behind. That's how our brains want it to work, because that's how effort usually works in real life. But money doesn't follow that logic once you start investing it properly. Wealth doesn't grow line by line. It grows by momentum. At the beginning, almost every dollar in your account came directly from you, your work, your discipline, your restraint. The returns feel small, almost embarrassing compared to the effort you're putting in. And that's exactly why this phase feels so discouraging. You're pushing hard, but the slope feels steep and unforgiving. What most people don't realize is that this slow, heavy resistance is not a flaw in the system. It's the system warming up. Like pushing a heavy object uphill, the hardest part comes before anything starts rolling on its own. And the mistake most people make is turning back just before gravity takes over. This is the moment almost no one talks about, because from the outside, nothing dramatic happens. Your life looks the same, your bank account looks fine, but not impressive. And emotionally, this is where things get dangerous. You've been doing the right things long enough to feel tired, but not long enough to feel rewarded. Friends are upgrading cars, taking trips, posting wins online, while your progress feels boring and private. This is where the quiet voice shows up and says, "What's the point?" Not because the strategy failed, but because your brain is starving for proof. This is also where lifestyle drift sneaks in. A slightly nicer apartment, a few more dinners out. One upgrade you swear won't matter. Individually, none of these choices ruin you. Collectively, they stop momentum before it ever forms. Most people don't fail financially in a dramatic collapse. They fade out here, slowly, convinced they're being realistic, when in reality, they're stepping off the path just before it starts getting easier. Hitting $100,000 doesn't feel dramatic the way people imagine it should. There's no sudden freedom, no lifestyle upgrade, no moment where you feel rich. In fact, that's why so many people misunderstand it. Most assume that $100,000 means you're 10% of the way to $1 million, but that's not how compound interest works. This milestone isn't about the number, it's about what you've survived to reach it. Up to this point, the majority of that money came from you, your paychecks, your discipline, your ability to delay gratification while seeing very little visible reward. The investment returns are there, but they're still quiet. And that's exactly why this phase breaks people. They look at the balance and think, "That's it? What they don't realize is that this is the hardest money you will ever make. Once you reach this level, the rules begin to change. From here on, your net worth starts participating in its own growth, and momentum finally has something to build on. After the first 100,000, something subtle but powerful begins to happen. The growth no longer feels entirely dependent on your effort. You're still contributing, still being consistent, but now time starts pulling more of the weight. The gap between milestones quietly shrinks. What once took nearly a decade begins to happen in just a few years. And the strange part is, from the outside, your life still looks pretty normal. There's no obvious signal that things are accelerating. But inside your accounts, the math is shifting. More of your net worth is coming from growth than from grind. This is where compound interest stops feeling theoretical and starts feeling real. Not exciting yet, not life-changing yet, but undeniably different. For the first time, you can sense momentum. And once momentum exists, the journey is no longer just about discipline. It becomes about staying out of your own way long enough for time to do what it does best. Around this level, the role money plays in your life begins to change in a way that's hard to explain until you feel it. Your investments aren't just growing anymore. They're starting to protect you. Losing a job no longer feels like an emergency. A bad year doesn't instantly spiral into panic. The constant background fear that quietly follows most adults begins to soften. At roughly $650,000 invested productively, the returns alone can cover a meaningful portion of everyday life. Not extravagance, not luxury, but stability. And stability is powerful. It gives you breathing room. It gives you options. You don't feel rich, but you feel steadier. And that steadiness changes how you make decisions. You stop reacting. You start choosing. Money hasn't given you freedom yet, but it has removed desperation. For many people, this is the first time they realize wealth isn't about showing off. It's about not being trapped by fear. This is where the change becomes internal. Not visible, not something you post about, but something you feel. When you're no longer constantly worried about survival, your identity starts to loosen its grip on fear. You don't wake up thinking about escape anymore. You start thinking about direction. You can say no without panicking. You can pause without falling behind. Risks stop feeling reckless and start feeling calculated. Maybe it's the idea of starting a business, learning a new skill, or simply stepping away from a situation that drains you. What's important isn't the choice itself, but the fact that you finally have one. Your money is now doing what money is supposed to do, buying you space to think clearly. This is what real progress looks like. Not louder, not flashier, just calmer. And once your mindset shifts here, you begin to understand why the final milestone feels less like a finish line and more like a confirmation of everything you've already built. Reaching $1 million doesn't feel the way movies make it seem. There's no sudden sense of excess, no dramatic upgrade to your life. Inflation has a way of humbling round numbers. But something far more important happens instead. You feel validated. After years of making the same boring decisions, often in silence, you finally have proof that the system works for ordinary people, not just insiders or outliers. The anxiety that once sat in the back of your mind shrinks to a manageable size. You know that even if nothing else goes perfectly, you're not starting from zero ever again. That realization changes how you sleep, how you plan, and how you see the future. You don't feel rich. You feel anchored. And that anchor opens doors that were previously locked, not because you chase status, but because your net worth quietly gives you leverage. This isn't the end of the journey. It's the moment the math truly tilts in your favor. What most people don't realize is that the first million is the hardest one you'll ever earn. After that, the math starts to feel almost unfair in your favor. Growth is no longer something you chase. It's something that shows up whether you're paying attention or not. A 50% increase doesn't feel impossible anymore. Doubling no longer sounds like a fantasy stretched across a lifetime. Each additional milestone requires less effort, less sacrifice, and less emotional strain than the one before it. This is where your relationship with money permanently changes. Every dollar you spend now carries a shadow, the future value it could have become. That awareness doesn't make life smaller. It makes your choices clearer. You stop asking, "Can I afford this?" and start asking, "Is this worth the time it's stealing from my future?" And once you think that way, there's no going back. Here's the uncomfortable truth most people would rather not sit with. Time is going to pass no matter what you do. The next 20 or 30 years will move forward, whether you invest consistently or keep putting it off for later. The only real difference is whether your money was working quietly in the background while you were busy living. Most people don't fail because they make one huge mistake. They fail because of thousands of small, forgettable choices that feel harmless in the moment. Another subscription, another impulse purchase, another year waiting for the perfect time. Those decisions don't feel expensive today, but they are brutally expensive over decades. You don't need to do everything right starting tomorrow. You just need to stop sabotaging the future version of yourself who's counting on the choices you make when no one is watching.